All right. All right. Kind of meant that to loop a little cleaner than that. Um, rough start to the rough report today, folks. All right. Just give me a second here. Yeah, I'm flying solo today. I expected. I was hoping that would be a good part of tonight's episode because she kind of set up the premise for it. So we might talk more on the subject she set up last week when she comes back next week. I think she'll be back next week. I know she's starting a D&D thing. Um, uh, yeah, copy link address. That's what I want. Sorry, I usually do the sharing when when the intro is up there. So posting that we are live on Twitter. Um, so yeah, the subject was, kind of defining communism and stuff like that, which is a subject I don't mind talking about at all. And like furthermore to kind of like expand on that point, not just defining communism, socialism, but I guess in the greater context of our political zeitgeist, like defining what the left is kind of, I think, more of a point to focus on because you can get wrapped up in all sorts of technicalities when you're talking about, um, defining what these terms are. Like, oh, it's not communism if you do this certain action or that certain action. So you get into this thing where it's like no true Scotsman, that isn't true communism, or true communism has never been tried, and sort of ignoring the faults of what have historically happened, right? It's not just like, to say it's not anti-communist to point out that attempts at communism in the past has had issues, or it shouldn't be considered as such. It should be important self-reflection on if this is, the sort of ideology you believe in. Um, you should be able to recognize what it is and isn't, and when it's failed, and how it's failed, and how you make it not fail the next time, and what the real like fault of the problems were, right? Because to not do that is, well, it's just refusing to learn from your mistakes, basically. Um, yeah. So I'm gonna get more into that in a second. I just gotta do this stupid posting. All right. Going over to Facebook. Usually I have my ring light to make lighting more consistent, but we were using the ring light to shoot the music video, which I'm not sure when is coming out because, every deadline we set, we keep going over it because, we're pretty busy people all in all. And setting deadlines for something like a video, which is not something, a music video, and in both technical and practical ways we've never really attempted before. It's definitely taken a lot longer than we initially expected. Um, one more post. I don't know if anybody's going to be joining us live today because we are starting a little bit later than usual, and I didn't do much promotion in the lead up to the show. But lo and behold, we're on schedule. Pretty much. I start a half an hour later than I normally do tonight, but we're hitting it twice a week or 2 weeks in a row, and yeah, we're aiming for next week too. We're on a roll. All right. So in terms of like defining what socialism, communism, the greater left is first appreciating that there are various degrees to this and that there are great possibilities for self-contradiction. And some of that self-contradiction is going to require reflection. Some of it's just going to have to accept that it is a contradiction and it is what it is. And sometimes, no matter what system you have, you're going to have little paradoxes, right? But what a lot of people seem to get wrapped up in when you're defining this stuff is the real like kind of horseshoe theory idea, whether they're aware it's called horseshoe theory or not, but that's sort of the shape of the thinking, so to speak. And they start to look at this authoritarian government that is in control of business or in control of commerce and day-to-day society in whatever degree you measure that. And most part they're referencing commerce, I think. But sorry, I'm thirsty. But there are important distinctions to be made there. And if you've been watching the show a long time or aware of my politics and hear me expand on these ideas, to me, and I think in a lot of greater Marxist contexts, the defining thing is like who has the agency, who has the power, who's extracting wealth from whom, and to whom's benefit. And that's the defining factor here. Do you have a government that rigorously endorses and enforces a policy that protects the working class in terms of their earnings, their self-agency, their ability to pursue life, love, and happiness in all that stuff? Are you is the policy in favor of that, or isn't the policy of business making as much as it can, selling to the working class the idea that this is also good for them, but who ultimately has the power, who has the most agency, who's holding the cards, who's extracting the wealth? That is the major defining factor. So to think of it purely from an authoritarian, like saying authoritarianism or totalitarianism is, equal to fascism, is simply not true. There are defining factors as to who benefits, and you can say, well, the working class didn't benefit from communism. Sure, we can have that argument. I can see why you would make that argument. I think there are historical examples where, working people, poor people have definitely benefited from those systems or systems that are more like it. And I think there's ways in attempts in the past that have made those ideas unsuccessful because of, some kind of corruption or, just ego, however you want to analyze it. I think there are certainly examples of that within communist attempts, so to speak, that can speak to that. And I think you can have that argument, like how much I agree or to what extent or what details, different, right? But these are points perhaps worth debating on rather than debating about what, fascism and communism because of via authoritarianism in that thinking, believing they're the same thing. Because, of course, to capitalists, to people who really hold the wealth and power in this system, and who can pay to lobby the government to form laws in its favor and put them in their back pocket, and all the various cliches that are cliches for good reason. um when the government enforces policy on them, that's communism, right? And in effect, sort of that is, or that's authoritarianism that's unfair to them, right? And they'll call, centrist liberal governments communist for wanting to have even a modicum of accountability to business, and have, you know, standards to be met on a legal basis. Um, so they cry authoritarianism in that sense and want to make you associate, those socialist and communist ideas with the same thing. There's this propaganda aspect to it where it's, comfortable and convenient thinking for them to have the public, you know, make not be able to make this distinction and not be able to make the analysis based on power. So, in the context of the greater left, I think you are a leftist when you're able to analyze these systems of power and look at it in the aspect of who benefits and why, right? So, and this includes, your so-called woke aspects. So I do not ascribe to a so-called left that denies what the right is attempted to propagandize as wokeism. Sorry, I'm drinking soda and now I'm getting bubbly in the chest there. All right. Because that wokeism and why they're so against it is a deconstruction of that same power system. It's recognizing, who benefits and why, and that is the true question of power. Not, being able to teach kids in school that gay people exist and that slavery was bad, you know. And so that these are like defining questions I when you boil it down. I think it's all about that dynamic of power and analyzing it from that point of view. To put it in, I guess, sort of like, I don't want to say vague. I am being a little vague. I'm trying not to get like super into the weeds with it, because the idea is, again, to define what the greater left is without, getting into the thicket of deep theory, right? Like that's definitely a chat I'm willing to have and a debate I'm willing to have. But for the sake of like defining these things in a way that I think speaks to the general public about about how they're mistaken when they think of authoritarianism and stuff. This isn't for people who already know, right? Like, and have an understanding of political theory. A sincere understanding of it, I guess, is also an important distinction. But and express a sincere understanding of it. It isn't for that. It's for, the average, so-called apolitical to semi-political person that maybe checks in and checks out, very engaged during voting season, and then maybe not so much after that. And to diffuse the type of propaganda and purposeful skewing of these definitions that you commonly see in online spaces, where people are going to see this and read this, and be influenced by it in various ways, right? So I say, like, you got to kind of speak to people where they're at in that sense, and not be like, you moron, according to Marx, if all you have to sell is your labor, then, da 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 da. People tend to kind of check out at that. I think you already have to have them as a certain audience to be able to get into that realm of things. So just look at it simply as the division of power. Who benefits? Who's making the profit? Where's that money going? Where's it being invested? To whose benefit? And if you're seeing a benefit given back to the people, again, business is going to claim that this is, like, somehow unfair to them. Tale as old as time. Tale is older than capitalism itself. When you break it down there. But as far as my leftist ass is concerned, who gives a shit? I don't care about their profits. I care about the benefit that the common person gets out of having an organized society and a government. And to that extent, I think it's necessary to have one. A lot of communists will, when you get deeper into true communism, is the absence of government, because you have this sort of self-fulfilling system of community, and to the point where people are doing the work and doing the jobs and growing the food and getting it to the people, and same with medicine and technology and all these things, and they're doing it because we got to the point where the system is automated and people do things because they want to. And it's like, and again, I'm, bear with me. I'm trying not to get too technical with it, right? But in the end, in a theoretical context, true communism is like the absence of money, the absence of government, right? That's the ultimate goal. And sometimes that's confusing to people who are kind of outside of this bubble, because they're like, well, how can you advocate for government regulation? How can you advocate for, enforcing this, that, and the other thing in different ways when your goal is to have no government? And then you got to get into, the stages and all that sort of thing. And again, I think people have it. Your average person that you're talking to at work, they're not going to get that deep into it, or they're just sort of going to glaze over at a certain point, right? And so again, speaking to people where they're at, and just understanding, like, to whose benefit do we work? To how are our taxes and the taxes that we spend and what we invest into our community in that sense, how are they being spent? Where is that money going? As we see our social systems, like, here in Canada, our healthcare, and well, everything to that extent, especially with the sort of, like, in Ontario and in several provinces, the sort of conservative domination that has been happening on that provincial level, Sure, we've had a liberal government on the national federal level, but the province, in terms of how it affects people's lives like this, you're talking education and healthcare is something that the provinces control far more than the federal government does. So that influence affects society greatly. Those two factors alone, let alone everything else. So you're seeing the slashing, and you're seeing the tax cuts going to the rich at the expense of that slashing, and but like we're not getting the benefit of that, right? We aren't experiencing that. The money isn't trickling down, right? Um, and yeah, again, to people who are like politically engaged, these may seem like sort of typical surface level arguments, but that's the conversations that we need to be having. And so when we're defining the left, and when people hear about the left on right wing media, when people hear about the left on their Fox News, or even articles on Facebook, or the Facebook groups or certain personalities or YouTubers and things like that, and get that misconception of what it is, because it's easy to fudge these terms to people who don't know, right? Or are given the impression that they think they know through years of enforcement and repeated messaging of this kind, to blur the lines between what authoritarianism is, what it means, what communism is, what it means, what fascism is, what it means, and what it means to the common person, what it means to the not common person. It's so easy to fudge it in such a way where it's all scary, because it's like, and then you land at that conclusion, that is a cliched conclusion that a lot of, it seems like a boomer-ish sort of opinion, so to speak. You land at, well, this system isn't great, but it's the best one we have, and it's like, is it though? That's the, I don't know. When you're defining these things, I think that's the level people need to speak at more and more, and lean into, the argument you're seeing around the American election, where, Joe Biden, how could you vote for him as a leftist because he does all these right-wing things? And it's just like, all things being relative, it's either that or something much worse, and so from an electoral perspective, that's the sort of thing that you're left to deal with. But on a day-to-day politic, on an organizing level, on a sense of that, something you can do to affect positive change in your community, or at least the very people around you, is to speak to things on this level, and where it's like, question that power system and who benefits and why, and have them understand that fascism was distinctly anti-left. They busted up unions. They took away worker power. People weren't even allowed to quit their jobs. And it was envisioned as the complete coalition of government enforcement and strong arm power in that sense, and business being at the winning end of that bargain. It was that sort of boiling down and synthesis in that sense, as opposed to the synthesis on the left that was taking away private business and private profits, and synthesizing that with the government, and thus the common person, who that government is supposed to be working for. Where fascism is distinctly saying, we're not working for the common person here. We're working for, the greatness of the country, which so happens to come in the form of corporate lords. As Mussolini said, now I'm trying to. Now I'm forgetting the quote. Fascism, I think, is better defined as corporatism, because that is the ultimate form of power, essentially, that comes down in fascism. Obviously, I'm not doing the direct quote. But he said something that was essentially that is because it is that synthesis to the benefit of corporate power. It could be described as corporatism as opposed to fascism. And so, again, the important distinctions. I know I was getting a little theoretical there, but again, I think that's stuff that, if you're talking to your coworker about it, that they can easily understand at the very least, even if they don't necessarily agree with it right away. Or never. But at least, they understand the distinction. They understand what when somebody is trying to skew that distinction, hopefully, where they realize that, this person is either just factually incorrect because they don't know, or they're factually incorrect because they're trying to steer me in the wrong direction. And speaking along some of those same lines, as I was saying earlier about how I do not ascribe to a left that denies the culture war, because it is inherent to the construct of our right-wing capitalist dominated society to have that culture war. And as long as they're waging it, as long as they're pointing to minority groups as targets, and they're on the offensive there. It's the culture war is not something that is pursued by leftist interests. It is in the leftist interest that this is simply not an issue, but it unfortunately is. And it's, again, being inherent to the power structure. It's not something to be ignored. And you're seeing that in effect coming over to Canada. We talked a bit about the American influence and, the motion that was passed at the Conservative Convention in Canada, basically saying, we don't ascribe to wokeism. And of course, now since then, has been a flood of a lot more stuff. I mean, this guy, what is it? Billboard Chris. Some of you might be familiar. Having a education over indoctrination sort of march on the 22nd. And as he points out, the counter-protesters will try and block us, and da-da-da, gets cut off. Billboard Chris has me blocked on Twitter. So I can't see what the rest of this is. I had to depend on this was a screenshot I found elsewhere on Twitter. So I can't see what the rest of that says. But I certainly hope there are counter-protesters there. And this guy has done his little tour around parts of the United States, I believe, as well. He's been running his grift all across this country, riding on the anti-woke, anti-trans sort of train. But it's like synthesizing into, you're even seeing it in American media here in Blade. America's LGBTQ news source. Canada's Conservatives take hard turn against transgender people. This was written just a day ago. Canada's federal and provincial Conservative parties are suddenly joining American-style culture wars centered on transgender issues, announcing new policies to crack down on access to medical care in women-only spaces and restricting trans children from using chosen names and pronouns in schools. Just echoing the exact same stuff that was not much of a talking point in American or in Canadian politics, pretty much up until the past year, where it's really ramped up. You've seen it talked about a lot in American media, of course. It's been going on for a while, and of course, it's echoed in some attitudes in deep conservative corners and meme pages and things like that. But you're truly starting to see this influence synthesize up here now, and yeah. So, of course, in the same American style vein, taking aim at Ontario school boards over indoctrinating students on gender identity. Now, it's, of course, not, it's both worth and not worth talking about the hypocrisy in how conservatives, and particularly the further right you get, the hypocrisy of it, because hypocrisy doesn't affect them. They don't give a shit about the hypocrisy, right? Hypocrisy is for the libs and the left. They're the ones that have to be responsible and careful with being consistent. They don't. And that's simply their attitude towards it. But of course, it's worth pointing out, just for the sake of fact and correctness, that conservatives are not against indoctrination by any stretch. They love indoctrination. Let's not fool ourselves, especially when you're talking about, far right evangelicals. The idea that certain aspects of reality and society simply cannot be questioned, such as, say, gender roles and gender itself. Certain aspects of society cannot be questioned in the sense of, is God real? Do I have to give money to the church or go to church every day or believe in the power of the church? Just, that's plain as day. I feel like it shouldn't even be somehow need to be said. Or my throat's getting really dry. I need a lot of fluids tonight. But yeah, so indoctrination is not the question here. And also, to be clear, I am also not completely against indoctrination. No matter what, indoctrination is a thing that you'll encounter when people, in groups of people, want to enforce policy that is good for their communities. And no matter which way you slice it, whether they think it's good for their community to have the power to the rich people or the power to the working people or in the poor people. There is some level of indoctrination where we're going to teach you that this is correct, and to go outside of that line, we're going to consider to be incorrect. And, in the raw aspect of saying, what is the difference between education over indoctrination? Well, I happened to Google that. And looking at it from um, this perspective here in this quote. Uh, what's the difference between indoctrination and teaching? In a teaching environment, students are encouraged to think independently and form opinions based on their learned information. Uh, in contrast, indoctrination does not allow for individual thought. Instead, students are expected to accept and repeat the provided information without question. Now, um, you're always going to have that, right? Like you're always going to have like lessons taught that are like, no, that's the wrong answer. Even though you looked at the information and you put this answer together based on the information that everybody had, sure. But your analysis of that information draws an incorrect conclusion. You are incorrect. We are going to correct you. No matter which way you slice it, you're going to have that. Like imagine like in like math class, or you know, 2 + 2 is 5. Excuse me, do not indoctrinate me into your world of 2 + 2 = 4. Like, there are incorrect conclusions to draw from information in a lot of ways. And that's complicated. Yeah. But we have to have a certain idea of what the right and wrong is and what basic human rights is, and be able to teach kids that, and that, denying human rights is bad. And yeah, I am in favor of that kind of indoctrination. Like, do transphobes not think that they're pro indoctrination? Like, they gotta know, obviously, right? Like again, but the hypocrisy of it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They care about just being able to do their indoctrination. Whether it is or it isn't, that's your problem. You deal with that. You unpack that. You chew on that. Meanwhile, we're going to get whatever the hell it is that we want because we're astroturfed. And don't think for a second that these sort of protests here don't have serious right wing money behind them. That they're astroturfed all the hell. Yeah. I feel like that's fairly obvious, but maybe not obvious to a lot of people. Like, look what ultimately ended the convoy thing in here in downtown Ottawa. Um, cutting off the money. Trudeau invoked the Emergency Act to cut off their funds coming in. In large part, that was the function of it. And yeah, they kind of dried up after that. It's almost like, that's a thing, you know? So yeah, like I was saying at the top of the show, I was expecting that to be on here, and she had a bit of a thing prepared to go on some of these subjects, but she ended up drinking a cannabis drink and got way too, let's say, out of focus to be able to come on the air tonight. She wasn't super keen on it. It's funny, just like hour and a half ago, we were having dinner, and we were going over the notes of the show and what we were going to talk about and stuff. And she was like writing stuff down, and now I'm pretty sure she's like asleep or something like that. So yeah, definitely next week we're going to be seeing what went down on this September 22nd protest that is apparently happening in Toronto. Toronto. Ugh. Why do I sound like that? Yeah. Okay. Back on track here. Anyway. Yeah, we're definitely going to be hopefully going over some of that. And yeah, I think I'm going to call it a show, even though I've only been on for about 40 minutes or so. But yeah, Nat bailed on me on the last minute, so I'm blaming her for not being on in this week's being a short one. We invited. Oh yeah, just to recap, last week there with the libertarian fella that we debated on the air. He said something after the show about wanting to debate how child slavery was good or child labor was good. I said, yeah, if you want to come back on the 24th, we can debate that. Sure, because I just, if nothing else, I think it would be funny to make fun of him for saying that, because it's just insane. But I never heard back from him, so I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I know in one of the next week's fairly, I would say, keen on politics guy that knows what he's talking about, a friend of ours, of Nat and I's, he wanted to come in the show and kind of go over some things with us. And yeah, he believes that Poilievre is a potential real threat, and I have my doubts about that. I don't know. You can cue in your comments on that if you think Poilievre honestly has a strong chance of winning. I question it because I feel like he's a bit of an Andrew Scheer, where people just like, you know, you have the diehard conservatives online, of course, being like loud and hurrah and all that. That's to be expected. But I don't know if he's really catching on in a way that could have the Liberals lose. I just don't know. I don't really get that strong vibe from things so far. So maybe we'll debate on that a little bit. I'd love to hear more about his insights into that, because if I'm wrong and he's right, I definitely I think that's also worth heavily addressing. So yeah, maybe we'll get to that next week. I know we were talking about that with them a few days ago. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. What else? Sorry, I'm saying so much. I'm really off my jive without Nat here. I'm going to keep blaming her. It's all her fault, folks. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much all I got to say. So a bit of a shorter one tonight. Thank you so much for coming by. Gonna play you out. As always, stay rough. Thanks for hanging out.